Imagine for a second that you are paying for the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive gym membership on the planet.
Oh, like one of those places with the eucalyptus towels and everything?
Yeah, exactly, the whole 9 yards. And you
Yeah.
show up every single morning at like 5 a.m. You do all the agonizing reps. You force down those chalky, just awful-tasting protein shakes.
The worst.
Right. You even memorize the biomechanics manual so you know exactly which muscle groups you're targeting. But here's the catch. You never actually step out of the gym and onto a playing field.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you never play a sport. You never run a race. You literally never use that strength for anything outside those four mirrored walls.
So you're incredibly strong, perfectly disciplined, and just entirely self-contained.
Exact.
All that potential energy is just trapped indoors, essentially serving no one but yourself.
Exactly. And honestly, that is the exact frustration a lot of people feel about their spiritual lives today. So, welcome back. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the very concept of obedience.
And it's such a crucial topic.
It really is.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at is this deep, quiet tension that so many believers experience. It's this lingering, almost, I don't know, guilty feeling of having a really sincere, private, spiritual routine.
The going to the gym part.
Right, going to the gym, reading the manuals, checking all the boxes. But then you look around and realize there is zero actual real-world impact happening in your life. To you, the learner listening right now, you might know exactly what this feels like.
It's a profound disconnect, and it's incredibly common. I mean, you see people attending services, praying, reading scripture with genuine sincerity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet, if they're honest, there's this question keeping them up at night. Like, is my faith actually changing the world around me, or am I just managing my own behavior?
Managing behavior, yeah.
Because when it's separated from an outward purpose, obedience just feels stagnant. It just, it feels like a dead end.
Okay, let's unpack this. What if the problem isn't that you aren't trying hard enough? What if changing the world doesn't actually require, massive resources or a loud social media platform or $1 million budget?
Right.
What if it just requires ordinary, everyday faithfulness? Our mission for this deep dive today is to bridge that gap between the private routine and the public impact by entirely reframing what obedience actually means.
And to do that, we have to recognize that our modern definition of the word obedience is completely backwards.
Completely.
The barrier here isn't a lack of passion. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are actually being asked to do.
It really is. Because usually, when we hear the word obedience, it immediately sounds like sin management.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like keeping your head down, avoiding bad things, not swearing when you stub your toe, and just doing your private devotions. It feels like playing defense.
Offensive is the perfect word for it. We've reduced this massive dynamic concept down to just private morality.
Just playing it safe.
Exactly. It becomes defined entirely by the negative space. What you avoid doing. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. And obviously, personal integrity and spiritual disciplines deeply matter.
Sure.
They're the anchor. But when you separate those practices from a larger mission, obedience becomes entirely passive. True biblical obedience isn't about hiding in a bunker. It is inherently missional.
Which is a huge shift.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, theologians use a phrase called missio Dei.
Missio Dei.
Yeah, it's a Latin term that just means the mission of God. And the core shift here is realizing that God is the primary actor in the redemption of the world.
Oh, interesting.
From the very beginning of creation to the ultimate restoration of all things, he is the one actively moving history forward. He's carrying the heavy load of fixing the brokenness.
Right.
He doesn't just want us to sit quietly and behave. He is inviting us to be active partners in that agenda.
I really love that framing. So it's less about us having to save the world all by ourselves. And it's more about realizing God is already out there doing the heavy lifting, and we're just being invited to, hold the flashlight for him.
Precisely. Every command, every prompt to act is simply an invitation to join a story that is already unfolding.
It makes me think of traditional obedience, like defensive driving.
Oh, I like that.
You're gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, checking your mirrors constantly, terrified of getting a ticket. You're just trying not to crash or break the rules.
Right, just avoid a disaster.
Yeah. But this mission-oriented obedience, it's more like driving an ambulance. You are actively navigating the chaos of the world because you're trying to bring healing and rescue to a specific destination.
That changes the entire calculation right there. I mean, it completely shifts the questions you ask yourself in the morning.
How so?
Well, instead of waking up and asking, what does God want me to avoid today so I can be a good person, you start asking, how does my life today advance what God is trying to heal in the world?
Wow.
The focus moves from inward preservation to outward participation. And when that happens, obedience stops being a private chore. It becomes the actual catalytic engine that transforms families and workplaces.
Wait, hold on, though. Let me push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
Because driving an ambulance sounds utterly exhausting.
It does.
For someone listening right now, maybe they're commuting to a job they don't even like, or they're just trying to get their kids to soccer practice on time.
Right, life is busy.
Exactly. The idea of obedience already feels like a heavy, guilt-driven burden. It's a list of obligations they already feel like they're failing at. So adding transform your workplace to their to-do list just sounds like a recipe for burnout.
Oh, for sure.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually flip that script from duty to delight without just exhausting ourselves?
That is the crucial pivot point. If mission-oriented obedience starts with your own willpower or like a strategic checklist, you will absolutely burn out.
Yeah, you'd hit a wall.
It doesn't begin with strategy. It begins with an internal transformation. There's this incredible promise in the book of Ezekiel where God says he will take away the heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh.
A heart of stone meaning what exactly? Like just being stubborn?
It means being unresponsive.
Ah.
You know, a stone is dead to its environment. It doesn't feel the cold. It doesn't feel the heat. It doesn't react.
Right.
A heart of flesh is sensitive. It's alive to the reality around it. What's fascinating here is how Jesus later connects this directly to action.
Okay.
In John 14, he says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." He is explicitly making obedience the language of love.
Wow.
It completely removes the dynamic of a terrified servant cowering before a demanding boss. It becomes an organic relational response.
Okay, but how does that actually happen? You don't just wake up one Tuesday morning,
Right.
stretch, and suddenly have a heart of flesh that loves everyone in rush hour traffic.
Oh, right. Definitely not in rush hour traffic.
So what's the actual mechanism for softening that heart?
It happens through proximity. You have to get close enough to the brokenness to actually feel it. Scripture reveals that God cares deeply about people.
Yeah.
And if you deeply love someone, you naturally start caring about the things they care about. As you spend time with God, his priorities bleed into yours.
That makes sense.
And this transformed heart generates three very specific, very natural impulses: compassion, urgency, and faithfulness.
Let's dig into that compassion piece, because I think we often confuse compassion with sympathy.
All the time.
Feeling sympathy is easy. You can scroll through a newsfeed on your phone, see a tragedy, feel a quick pang of sympathy, and then immediately go back to watching a video of a cat.
Exactly.
Sympathy doesn't cost you anything.
Right, and that's why we need to define this as missional empathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone from a safe distance.
Okay.
Missional empathy is looking at a crowd or your office or your neighborhood and seeing their spiritual and physical needs through God's eyes. The Gospels constantly describe Jesus looking at the crowds and being moved with compassion because he saw them as harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd.
He didn't see them as annoying or as a networking opportunity or as a burden. He saw them as stranded.
Exactly. And when you see people as stranded rather than irritating, obedience just becomes an organic response to their need.
Yeah.
When Jesus touched lepers and ate with outcasts, it wasn't a PR strategy. It was deeply compassionate action flowing from that heart of flesh.
And what about urgency? Because for a lot of us, urgency just sounds like anxiety.
Yes, it can.
Does that mean we're supposed to be panicking or stressing out that we aren't saving enough people?
Not panic, no. Panic is rooted in the belief that it all depends on you, which, takes us back to forgetting Missio Dei.
Right. God's doing the heavy lifting.
Exactly. Urgency is just the sober recognition that this stuff actually matters. It carries eternal weight. It's the realization that a person's reconciliation with God is the most important reality in human life.
So it wakes you up.
Yeah, it just pulls you out of your spiritual complacency. And then the third impulse, faithfulness, is simply the steady, joyful practice of acting on that compassion and urgency in your normal daily life.
Okay. Having a transformed heart and missional empathy sounds beautiful in a deep dive discussion.
It does.
But let's be fiercely practical for a second. Stepping into an actual mission, like initiating a conversation with a neighbor or standing up for something at work, is terrifying.
It's incredibly scary.
People talk about stepping out in faith like it's standing on a high dive in the dark. You can't see the water, but you're commanded to jump. But honestly, I think it's more like trying to merge onto a busy highway.
Merging onto a highway, how so?
Well, it feels completely counterintuitive to press the accelerator and speed toward a bunch of fast-moving metal boxes.
That's true.
Your brain screams at you to stop. But if you don't match the speed of the traffic, you'll actually cause a crash. Obedience feels like that. It requires accelerating to match the speed of what God is already doing out there, even when your instinct is to hit the brakes.
That's a great way to put it.
So how do we differentiate between a genuine lack of preparation, like I really shouldn't be merging yet, and just plain old fear?
This raises an important question about how we handle the tension between fear and faith. We often think that feeling terrified means God isn't in it, or that we aren't qualified.
Right, we look for a feeling of peace.
Yeah, but if you look at historical precedents, feeling completely inadequate is practically a prerequisite. Take Moses, for example.
Oh, classic example.
God tells him to march up to Pharaoh, the most powerful dictator on earth, and demand the liberation of an entire enslaved nation.
And at this point, Moses is basically a fugitive shepherd hiding out in the desert.
Right.
His resume for confronting an empire is essentially non-existent.
Exactly. And Moses is full of excuses. He says, who am I to do this? I stutter, I can't speak well, they won't believe me. We usually read that and think Moses lacked courage. But really, he just lacked a proper view of his own role. He thought he was supposed to be the architect of the liberation, when he was really just the contractor following the blueprints.
Oh, that is such a good distinction.
And God doesn't respond to Moses' fear by giving him a detailed 10-point leadership seminar or a communications workshop.
Here's a TED Talk on public speaking, Moses.
Right. God simply says, I will be with you. Fear actually signals our need for dependence. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of the fear because you trust the presence of the one who sent you in the first place.
We see that same pattern with Abraham, too. He's told to leave his homeland, his security, his entire economic safety net, and he doesn't even get a map.
No map at all.
He just has to start walking and trust the merger.
Yes, Abraham had to trust the destination before he could see it. His obedience launched a global mission. But then, of course, you have the cautionary tales. You have Jonah.
Right, the guy who gets a clear direction from God and literally buys a boat ticket in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah. Jonah fled to Tarshish. And what is so insightful about Jonah's story is that it perfectly illustrates how our love of comfort and predictability often disguises itself as rationality.
Oh, that stings a little. Say more about that.
Well, we very rarely admit that we're just scared or comfortable. Instead, we justify staying in our safe harbors by calling it being practical or setting healthy boundaries or, waiting for a clearer sign.
Well, you just spin it.
Yeah, we dress our disobedience up in the language of wisdom, but mission-oriented obedience almost always requires leaving those comfort zones.
Contrast that with Philip in the New Testament, the story of the Ethiopian official in Acts chapter 8.
That is the ultimate highway merge. Philip is in the middle of a very successful, bustling ministry, and he gets an internal prompt to go walk down a deserted, dusty road in the middle of nowhere.
It makes no sense on paper.
It defied all strategic logic. There was no grand plan explained to him, but he goes. He meets this Ethiopian official riding in a chariot who's confused by a scroll he's reading.
Right.
Philip simply explains the gospel to him, and that one immediate act of obedience multiplies the message globally into an entirely new continent. It proves that obedience always precedes opportunity.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if you're listening to this on your commute right now or while folding laundry, you might be thinking, look, that's a great story for Moses facing down a king or Philip walking through the ancient desert.
Sure.
But I'm an accountant. Or I'm a middle school math teacher. Or a dental hygienist. Let's be real. Isn't a spreadsheet just a spreadsheet?
Right. What does that have to do with God's mission?
Exactly. How does someone sitting in a corporate cubicle actually live this out? If my coworker constantly throws me under the bus in board meetings, feeling missional empathy for them feels impossible, maybe even naive.
Oh, totally.
How's this not just turn into awkwardly preaching to annoyed coworkers by the water cooler?
That is the most vital question we can ask because we have totally bought into the myth of the sacred-secular divide. The sacred-secular divide? We have this unspoken hierarchy in our heads where pastors and overseas missionaries are doing the quote-unquote real spiritual work, and the rest of us are just paying the bills.
Right, just getting by.
But that assumption is entirely dismantled by the biblical framework.
So how does a spreadsheet become spiritual?
It goes back to Colossians 3.23, which essentially instructs believers to work at whatever they do, whether it's coding software, fixing plumbing, or balancing ledgers, as if they are doing it directly for the Lord. All believers are designated as ambassadors and ministers of reconciliation.
And if you're an ambassador, then wherever you're standing is your embassy.
Exactly. So vocational mission means the work itself has inherent value. A teacher isn't just babysitting kids until Sunday school, they're actively shaping the moral imagination of the next generation.
Powerful.
A business leader who operates with radical integrity, fairness to their employees, and generosity is visibly modeling the ethics of God's kingdom in a cutthroat industry. A healthcare worker is literally embodying the physical compassion of Christ to the suffering.
Okay, so applying this to that backstabbing coworker. If I'm an ambassador in that board meeting, my job isn't to be a doormat, but it also isn't to play the same ruthless political games they're playing.
Right.
My obedience might look like holding my ground with absolute integrity, defending someone else who's being marginalized in that meeting,
Yeah.
and just refusing to retaliate.
Yes. That response right there, that turns a toxic corporate boardroom into a sacred mission field. You are bringing the light of a different kingdom into that specific darkness. There's a highly practical tool for this called mapping local impact.
I really want to highlight this because this takes it from theory to reality. How do we map our impact?
It suggests taking a deliberate step back and literally observing your exact environment, your workplace, your kid's school, your street. You look for the overlapping spiritual and practical needs. Maybe you notice that there's a severe lack of mentorship for the junior employees at your firm and they're all burning out. Or maybe you realize there's a single parent on your street who never has time to mow their lawn. You map those observed needs and match them with your specific capacities and gifts.
It completely reframes your daily routine. You stop seeing your commute as just a frustrating drive to a paycheck, and you start seeing it as driving through your specific assigned mission field.
It does, but we have to add a massive caveat here.
Which is?
Even if you map your workplace perfectly and you're trying to operate with integrity and you're helping your neighbors, your individual capacity is severely capped.
Sure.
One person cannot fix a toxic corporate culture or heal an entire neighborhood. Trying to execute God's mission all by yourself is a guaranteed recipe for isolation and burnout.
It's like trying to carry a grand piano up a flight of stairs by yourself. You can have all the willpower and passion in the world, but you're just going to throw out your back and probably crush your foot.
Yeah.
But if you have a community, if 4 or 5 people each take a corner, suddenly that massive weight moves effortlessly.
That is a brilliant visual, and that brings us to why this was never meant to be a solo project. The community provides the essential scaffolding for courage.
Yeah.
It's really easy to talk yourself out of merging onto that highway if you're driving alone. But if you look at the model of the early church in Acts chapter 2, mission-oriented obedience was intensely communal.
Right. They did everything together.
They pooled their resources, they ate in each other's homes constantly, and they bore each other's burdens.
It wasn't just a utopian social club.
Yeah.
It was a practical necessity for survival and impact.
Exactly. When you integrate different personal gifts, someone who's great at teaching, someone who has a natural gift for hospitality, someone who's drawn to serving the poor into one unified community, that obedience becomes visible.
It becomes real.
It becomes magnetic. The community itself actually becomes the greatest evangelistic tool because the outside world can look at it and see a tangible alternative to the isolation and division they experience everywhere else.
Which totally redefines the idea of relational evangelism.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people cringe at the word evangelism because it feels like a forced sales pitch.
Oh, yeah, like a multi-level marketing scheme.
Exactly. It feels like you have a hidden agenda for every conversation.
True relational evangelism is the exact opposite of manipulation. It's sharing your faith through authentic, patient connection. You invite people to your dinner table.
Yeah.
You listen to their stories without waiting for your turn to drop a Bible verse. You meet practical needs together. That service builds credibility. It mirrors exactly how Jesus engaged people. He met them exactly where they were with genuine care and an attentive presence long before he asked them for anything.
And a crucial part of that communal aspect is mentorship. It's passing the baton.
Right, because if the mission stops with you, it's a failure. You see this with Jesus and the 12 disciples, or the Apostle Paul intentionally investing in a young Timothy.
It has to multiply.
Mentorship ensures that obedience multiplies. You identify someone, you build an intentional relationship with them, you let them see your own struggles and successes, and then you release them to do the same. It turns your individual obedience into a generational legacy.
Wow. We have traversed a lot of territory today, and I want to make sure we land the plane clearly.
Yeah.
We started with that frustrating feeling of being trapped in the spiritual gym,
Yeah.
doing the reps, but never playing the game.
Right.
We've redefined obedience from a defensive, avoid sin at all costs chore to a dynamic, forward-moving partnership with God's mission.
The beautiful shift.
We talked about how that engine isn't fueled by guilt, but by a transformed heart of flesh that generates real missional empathy. We shattered the myth that your job isn't spiritual enough, proving that your cubicle or your classroom is actually holy ground. And finally, we grounded all of it in the reality that you simply cannot carry that grand piano alone.
Yeah.
You need the shared courage of a missional community.
It really is a massive paradigm shift. It
Right.
relieves you of the pressure of having to do something globally recognized or spectacular.
Yeah.
It places the focus entirely on being faithful with what is right in front of you. It replaces the heavy burden of duty with the deep joy of partnering with what God is already doing.
So to you, the learner listening right now, perhaps driving in your car or sitting at your desk, remember that your current daily routine, your home, your specific office, your exact neighborhood, is not an accident.
Not at all.
It is your specific divine assignment. You don't need a pulpit, and you don't need a passport to be on mission.
You just need a willingness to obey the small prompts you're given today. Those ordinary acts of obedience, like merging onto a highway, compound over time to create extraordinary impact.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as we close. Think back to that idea of mapping local needs. What if that highly specific, incredibly mundane frustration you noticed in your neighborhood or at your workplace today isn't just a random annoyance meant to ruin your Tuesday?
Right.
What if it's a highly specific divine invitation for your obedience to intersect with someone else's redemption? What if it's time to finally step out of the gym and onto the field?